faith, family, business, adventure. This is the Phoenix Podcast with Ken Sharpe.
Welcome to the Phoenix Podcast Show. Good evening to our listeners and viewers and followers. It's a privilege to welcome on tonight's show Napoleon Nyanhi. Thank you for joining us, Napoleon.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We're excited to hear your story, but before we do, I'm going to read to the audience your long introduction of so many degrees, and I know you like collecting them, so I'd love to read them all out. But really, this show is about showcasing the story of people coming from nothing and rising like the phoenix rises from the ashes. So you're the Executive Director of the National Arts Council of Zimbabwe and been a practitioner for over 20 years. You joined the NACZ to spearhead the formalisation and monetisation of the centre, which I'd love to hear about, and the cultural centre into a robust industry contributing meaningfully towards Zimbabwe's GDP. You've held different positions of influence as the producer of the NAMA Awards, Managing Director of the Jacaranda Culture and Media Corporation, Curator of the Centre for Broadcasting Excellence, Production Manager at C Media Africa, Founding Station Manager of Capital FM, and Programming Manager of Star FM. You have degrees and certifications from Africa University, Clark Atlanta University, University of Witwatersrand, University of Westminster, and most recently a master's degree in Strategic Management and Corporate Governance from MSU. Throughout your career, you've demonstrated a deep understanding of the transformative power of the arts to inspire, educate, and unite communities. Wow, that's a powerful introduction, if I may say so.
Thank you.
So straight into it, why do you like studying and why so many degrees?
I'm actually not an academic. I don't like studying.
Are you telling us the truth?
Funny enough. But throughout my life, I've been in situations where the grace takes me to a certain place, and then when I get to that place, people question, how did you get here? Who are you? And I've always had to then go to school to back myself up.
Okay.
I've always been in places where people feel I'm not qualified, so I'll then have to get school to back myself up. So it's always been by necessity, not necessarily because I love school.
Not by design.
Not by design.
So tell me, do you feel better off now having the degrees?
I love it. I do feel better off. I do have a bit more knowledge than I had before. Reason why I say I'm not an academic is because I'm an audio visual learner. I do better with an audio book than an open book. And unfortunately, our education system is not geared in that way. So you have to sit in a class and listen and read text and read volumes of books. Give me a book to read, I'll fall asleep. So I think later on in my life, I then figured out what kind of a learner I am. And it became a little bit easier because I will just learn with videos. If I get a video and I watch it, I'll remember everything. But if you give me a book, I'll forget it. The next day, I won't know what I read. So it made it much easier as I was going. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about this. We look at the University of Life, which is the experience we gain. Yeah. And we learn a lot from our own experiences.
True.
And then we look at the University of Academics and theoretical knowledge. And I'm a practitioner, having been in business now for 35 years plus. I didn't finish high school. I didn't do my A-levels. But yet I found myself about 5 years ago being accepted to go study at Harvard Business School, and I'm now a graduate of HBS. Yeah. I'm an alum. And I was humbled by the case studies because, we studied 120 or 130 case studies of companies, the largest companies in the world, and networked with my peers that were much more academically qualified than me. But I realized quickly being in there that it's the experience that really talks. The academics is fine as a basic foundation, but even the professors would admit that in our course, the MBA students really come to learn, but in our course, the professors come to learn from us. So looking at the degrees that you've got, and considering we had a lady on the program recently, Tafara, in this season 3, and she talked about how important education was. Her mum really instilled it, and her mum was a teacher. And I look at Madiba Nelson Mandela saying that education is the most powerful weapon that will change the world. How do you relate to all of that?
I believe education teaches discipline. It teaches you how to learn. So the more educated usually usually, the more educated you are, the quicker you are when it comes to learning and adapting to certain spaces and grasping certain concepts. I don't necessarily particularly respect the name of the degree or the particular level that you went to. The only thing that I respect about that level is you have proven that you've got the discipline to sit through a grueling experience for 4 years and come out with the certificate. And then after those 4 years, maybe you went into another 2 years and you had the discipline to come up with a project proposal and then do a whole dissertation. And then, because it's the discipline for me that proves that you are worth your salt, not necessarily the actual knowledge that you gain from the course. A lot of people who go, especially when it comes to adult education, a lot of the people that are in those classes, they already know the things that they're learning. When I did my MBA, when I did my master's, a lot of the stuff that we were learning, possibly 80+% of what I learned over those 2 years, are things that I already knew because I'd been working in the executive space of management. But the discipline of still respecting the deadlines, studying all night, making sure that you submit your stuff on time, and going through all the little rigorous things that they need you to do to then achieve the certification. I feel that's what we need to respect, not necessarily the knowledge.
And it's the pressure that you're under, right? That time pressure.
Exactly.
That's what creates the excellence.
Yes, and if I am to employ someone who has got more certification than someone who doesn't, it would be for that reason, not necessarily for the fact that this one doesn't have a degree. If this one can prove, even without a degree, that they've got the grit and they've got the stamina and they've got the discipline and understanding and the ability to work under pressure, they should get the equal opportunity. Yeah.
You know, I look at the course that we did, and what you say really, I relate to it a lot, because during the HBS course, there were things that I'd practiced my whole life in business.
Yeah.
And I never knew if they were right. And the course was there to reinforce that a lot of the things I was doing was right. So it was a confidence booster for me to say, what? I'm at the world's leading, institution on business here, and these things that I've been practicing, I don't know where they came from, but they're right. So it gives you a boost to know that I'm 80% there. But that 20%, as you say, is important, because it's that knowledge, the fine-tuning, the details, the technical details that help you to get further.
We don't tend to trust the gifts and the grace of God on our lives sometimes.
That is so true.
And
it is the grace of God.
You just have it in you and you do it. But then sometimes when the experts say, actually, wow, you've been doing what we've been teaching all along, I think it does give a confidence booster. Yeah.
And so tell us about and if I can use this term, applied knowledge. So how do you, it's fine to have the academic behind you, and we have many graduates in Zimbabwe, millions of people have graduated from universities. But how do they then apply that knowledge and make it practical and usable in their lives?
That's the most difficult part, actually, because we in our country are inundated with academics who struggle with application, where we are very learned. The word doctor is very easy to throw around in the country because we've got a lot of them. Some honorary doctorates, some scholarly doctorates, some PhDs, etc. And yet application is always a big challenge. I believe application is your ability to then merge your experience from the school of life. Some would call it the school of hard knocks. Some would call it the school of struggle, and then merge that with your academic knowledge or experience from school, and then be able to create real value. Real value then comes from impacting people. I think real value then comes from creating opportunities or creating products or creating services that really impact people, and then being able to stay the course. You're an entrepreneur. You would know the importance of staying the course. There are certain businesses or situations where you get into, and for 5 years, for 10 years, for 15 years, it is not making sense. But you've got a vision, and you see how it. You're just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up with what you have seen and what you believe, and that ability to stay the course, and then also the wisdom to know when to quit. So all of that, that you don't learn at school.
I love that. You know, there's a prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change.
Yeah.
And the strength to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
So that is so true. But in your view, what is the thing that keeps you going, that keeps you focused on how to get there, you know? It's easy to give up, as you said, the tough gets going, and sometimes you just want to give up. And, you know, there's too much coming at you. It's just too much to take.
I think for a season in my life, I struggled with the question of purpose. And why am I on earth? Who am I? Why did God create me? What's the one thing that I'm supposed to achieve and change and fix or create? And somehow through soul-searching, prayer, and possibly through rationalizing it myself, I found my purpose to be my children.
Wow.
And I believe that's one of the most basic reasons why we are created. If we are to look at the basic nature as mammals or as Homo sapiens, we're here to procreate and live, literally, so that the species continues. If we're to take it to that basic level. So I thought to myself, you know what, I think God created me to have these beautiful children and make sure that I give them the best chance at life. That's what keeps me going.
How many children do you have?
I've got 3.
And ages?
Oldest is 12, and then 8, and then the youngest is a year old.
A year.
Yeah.
So the 1 year can't be listening yet, but he will. he or she?
The youngest is a boy.
Is a boy. So he will listen at some stage in the future to this program.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping these children are listening to you, because it's special when a father says his purpose in life is his children. And we know the biggest problem in societies, in Western societies, in the United States of America, for example, did you know that the number one factor of crime is fatherless homes? 80% of convicted criminals in prisons come from homes without fathers.
Yeah.
So we look at those statistics, which are frightening, and then I look at you, it's humbling. So thank you for that comment. Looking at your own children and talking to them now, in my own life, my father gave me a one-way ticket and £100 at the age of 17 and said, you're on your own. And a lot of people will look at that and say, that's harsh, you know, you need to do more for your kids. And,
Ouch.
and I look back at it and I thank him. He's late now, but I thank him, because that was what made me into who I am. And there's a Harvard professor who wrote a book called The Innovator's Dilemma. He's known as the father of innovation. He got very ill, had cancer. He survived the first time, but he wrote another book in his life, which is more spiritual, more philosophical, how you'll measure your life. And he talks about upbringing of children. And he says it's not what we do for our children that makes them, but it's what we don't do for them. So how do you relate to that? And you know, it's easy to spoil children today, and especially in Western societies. You look at children today, they get things so easily, you know, this generation. How do we continue to make them into what they need to be without doing it for them?
Wow, that's a harsh
It's
comment.
a buzz.
Wow. It's not what we do for them, but what we don't do. That
so
is
look at your own life, maybe reflect.
Yeah, that is quite a sobering quote, because I'm also always wondering about the balance between chasing achievement and trying to get them a good life by working so hard, working long hours, being so committed to the so-called rat race for me to make money, for them to have the good life that I would like for them to have, at the expense of my absence. And that quote then hits home, where you're saying it's not necessarily what you do for them, because I know I do a lot, but what do I not do? And what's the impact of the things that I'm not doing? Whew, okay.
So take it back a generation. What did your parents not do for you or do for you that has made you into who you are?
I also had a rather tough upbringing. I was born in 1984, 40 years ago. I turned 40 recently.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I was born in Harare. I, until the age of 7, was in a very difficult time of my mom and my dad's marriage. There was a lot of fighting and a lot of strife in the home, culminating to a divorce when I was 7. Stayed with my father for a few and then moved to stay with my mom. My mother was unemployed. She was staying with her older sister who was renting one room in Hatfield. So it was a one-room apartment, just one big room. In that room was myself, my mother, my 2 cousins from my mother's late brother. So there was 3 children, my mom and my aunt. We stayed in one room, so the room was slightly bigger than this, maybe slightly smaller than the studio. They would put a curtain in the middle, so you've got the bed on the side, then there's a curtain, and then there's a small space which is the kitchen and lounge and everything else. So, you know, so the 3 of us, myself and the 2 younger cousins, would sleep on the floor in the other side, in the kitchen side, and then my mom and my aunt would sleep on the other side. I remember when my aunt, rest her soul, my mom and my aunt are both late now. I remember when she started dating and she had a male friend. And so my mom, myself, and the 2 cousins had to sleep on this side. And my aunt and her new, and her husband, which he eventually became her husband, would have to sleep on the other side. Yeah, that's the toughest, those are the toughest times. And my mom, during that time, because I would sleep next to her, would cry every single night. And I witnessed that. So it was a tough time, you know. So that was, I think I was in grade 5 at that time. And all the way until Form 4, I would stay with my guru, my mother's older sister. We moved around a lot. I think every year we would move because we were lodgers, so to say. We were renting. So every other time, either they would, you know, default on rent or some issue. So we'd move from one, we called them boy sky, move from one boy sky to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next.
Napoleon, if I may interrupt, we're going to take a short commercial break. We'll be back.
Sure.
Faith, family, business, adventure. This is the Phoenix Podcast with Ken Sharpe. Faith, family, business, adventure. This is the Phoenix Podcast with Ken Sharpe.
Oof, crying all night, your mom. Moving from house to house.
Yeah.
This is a tough story.
Yeah. So, you know, you get older and you realize that you don't have a childhood home. You know, many people are like, I feel so good. I'm going back home. You know, I don't have a childhood home. We stayed in so many places, more than 20 places that I stayed in. But, you know, looking on the bright side, I had that aunt of mine. She was a great pillar. Eventually, my mom also got a job. She was a taxi driver for a company called Rixie Taxi.
I remember that.
If you remember that, yeah.
Blue and grey.
Yes, exactly. A while back. So, you know, at least, you know, school fees and things like that were becoming a bit more stable. And then by the time I was 16, moved out and started staying with my brothers.
And you were attending school, moving different places?
Yes. So,
same school or changing?
In primary school, my aunt, that my guru that I talked about, was a teacher. She taught at Queensdale Primary School. So that made it a bit easier because I was the teacher's son. So I was at Queensdale Primary School in primary school. And then high school, I went to St. John's Chikwaka, which was a boarding school. So all the movements didn't quite affect me because I was at boarding school. Besides the fact that I'd come on holiday and, find out that we've got a new address literally every year. But still, I think I managed somehow. There was a bit of stability somehow. Because I don't think I turned out too bad.
No,
but it also taught me to adapt. I think there's a lot of things that we try and shield ourselves from or shield our children from, and yet God wants that struggle to happen for the sake of where you're going. I'm one of those people, I can get into any room and adapt. I can quickly, because I've never quite had the time to sink into a comfy place or a comfort zone where this is who I am, these are the type of people I hang out with. I always had to be changing and shifting, and so anytime I can adapt to a new environment, and it taught me how to be tough as well. If you're always the new kid, obviously it's difficult to fit into the cliques and all of that. There's bullying that happens, so I always had to sort of toughen up and stand up for myself.
And I'm assuming this is at boarding school now.
This was more. It was both at home and at boarding school.
Right.
At boarding school, it was a bit easier because I was at the same school the whole time, from Form 1 to Upper 6. However, whenever I'd go back home, the friends that I was with before, we've moved to another place. Okay. So now we have to meet new people, and create new friendships and all of that. So that's where most of the toughening up happened. Yeah.
And bullying at boarding school, did it happen to you?
It happened. Back then, it was not known as bullying. We never even looked at it as bullying. It was just, you're Form 1. Yeah. You're in Form 1, you have to go through the mill. There's these rites of passage that you have to go through, and part of it includes cleaning the shoes of this Form 4 guy and making this guy's bed. And this guy comes and says he wants the bread you're eating, just have to give it to him. Didn't know it was bullying back then, but now it's bullying. But
so that character forming years.
Yes.
How do you look back at those things that your parents didn't do for you, that have made you into the person you now are?
I absolutely love them. I wouldn't trade them, because I can so specifically point to things in my character that I know were built at that time through their absence or the lack that I had thereof. Like, I'll give you an example. When I was in university, I went to Africa University in Mutare. My father blatantly, straight up told me that this university that you've chosen is expensive. The only thing that I can pay for is the tuition. You have chosen to go and stay on campus because it's in Mutare and you live in Harare. You've made your choices.
You're on your own.
Fend for yourself. For the rest, for the food, for the accommodation, for anything else that you need, I can pay for your school fees. You're grown up now. So it was tough at that time, but for anyone who went to university with me knows every year I had a business of sorts on campus. I made sandwiches and sold sandwiches for a long time. Literally polony. I bought a sandwich maker, and would put
Those
polony.
toasted ones.
Yeah, the toasted ones. I put polony in between two slices, toast it, and sell it. And the business became so good that I would close shop and say, no, we're closed. Don't bother me. I need to sleep.
And study.
And I need to study, because people now would knock all hours of the day and say, where are the sandwiches? And then left that, started doing movies on campus. I went and negotiated with the dean and asked for a lecture theater on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights. So I would, and then I got a little home theater system, and I'd put it in and it literally created such a theater experience, and I'd show movies. And again, it was a great business. I paid my accommodation, paid my food for food every day and all of that. And that is a struggle because literally your father is supposed to do that for you. He was straight up with me. You're a grown up now. This is all I can afford. Make a plan. And just like you were, alluding to earlier, that your father also just sent you out and said, hey, here's £100, one-way ticket, go. It's pretty similar to that. And it taught me a lot of things. And I would be laughed at, especially when I started the sandwich business. I was called, Napoleon Nyanhi. It was difficult. There was a lot of ridiculing, but I had to do what I had to do, and it worked out.
So I'm going to ask you this next question, but before I do, I even know that we're brothers from different mothers, but same father above.
Yes.
And I see it in your own life, because there's so much of what you said that I reflect in my own life of my struggles and my journey. And it really is character forming, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's part of who you are and your identity. You embrace it, and it helps you to see your purpose and gets you to where you need to be at the end of the day, because God knows best. Man plans, but God directs his steps.
Sure.
So I wanted you to share with us, if you don't mind, something about your faith. Like, what is your belief system? What is your religion? When did it happen? How does it affect your life today?
I believe in God. I strongly believe in God. I've been a Christian pretty much all my life, but I got born again or got baptized when I was like 8 years old.
Oh, that's young.
Yeah, and since then there's always been a thread in my life of seeing, of talking and communing with God, and then also seeing God's hand, and literally just seeing grace and seeing Him directing my path, and just knowing that there is a greater purpose. There's big things that I'm supposed to achieve. I don't know where or who particularly planted those seeds in me at a young age, but there was always a greater purpose. I always knew that this is only for now. So the Bible and the Word were a constant reminder for me. I joined Celebration Church when I was 19, and it was another big foundational space for me, because I learned a lot in terms of a lot of the things that I apply in business now. I learned them there, and not as spiritual lessons, but more just integrity, just being a person of your word, being, timekeeping and all of that. So it's all intertwined with my faith. How I operate in business is one thing for me. It's all worship, because that was my foundation. I learned all those things in church. So now when I operate in business or in the corporate space, it's all worship to me. So at Celebration Church, I went there, joined the choir. I sang in the choir for a bit, and found my wife there. We met in the choir.
Fantastic.
Got married in 2011. So my 14-year anniversary is coming up. Excited about that. So we then grew together in that space, and I then, because I was working in the church at that time, and then I left. I started working at the radio station. I worked at Star FM for a while, went and worked at Capital FM, and so throughout all my work experience and career, my wife still works at the church, and so it's to me it's still just intertwined. It's one thing. Yeah,
I love that. Several things come to mind. The first one is anointed for business. Ed Savosa was a mentor of mine, is still a spiritual father. And he showed me that we're called in our vocations to preach the gospel. So it's not only Sunday saints, that if you look at Jesus' own life, every day he was in the marketplace, he was with people.
Amen.
And I think whatever we're doing, we demonstrate the light of Christ through our actions. Some Christians believe we are saved by faith alone. And I believe that. But then there's also, without works, faith is dead.
True.
So the two have to go together. And I'd love to hear, as we get into the close of this section, we've got a few minutes before our next commercial break, I'd love to hear of some of the things that you're doing and the influence you have, because you have an extremely influential position, being in arts, in culture, in entertainment, having been in media.
Yeah.
You know, I think there's a certain responsibility that goes with these callings.
True.
And if I look at our colleagues, and I don't want to name or blame any of them, even in Zimbabwe, especially out of Zimbabwe, in the Western Hemisphere, we look at their, what they're portraying, their message, the content to the youth today. And it's disappointing to see that our cultures are being so diluted and we're losing the essence of our value system. So what are you doing in aligning your faith to practicing what you preach,
Well, it's a loaded question, thank you. Indeed, the position that I occupy now is very influential, but very sobering at the same time, because it's a huge responsibility. It's one of those thankless jobs where you have to create structures, systems, and institutions for people that may never say thank you, and that may actually come and blast you for it. And you should still just, be like water on a duck's back and just keep going, which is a tough thing to do, which is where the faith comes in. Indeed, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to protect our culture, protect our morality, protect our systems of operation in Africa and in Zimbabwe specifically, because there is a major drive in the West which is really just leading to decay in our moral structures and in our systems of operation, which have kept the world together, so to say. I believe a lot of what is being peddled and pushed there attacks the family unit first, before they then move into the rest of society. And I believe part of the mandate that I would then have in the arts and with this what you called anointed for business, or the calling towards the marketplace, is to work to preserve the family unit. A lot then comes into it when we talk about preserving the family unit. A lot comes with, creating content that is not harmful for children, creating content that promotes right living, avoiding or discouraging content that promotes drug use and promotes irresponsible living and all of that. So there's room and there's space for it, and I thank God for it, because the arts sector in Zimbabwe is very vibrant, but not as well developed in terms of structures and systems as the Western countries or a few other African countries. So that means there is scope and there's a chance for us to really make a difference as we create these systems to infuse in there structures that will ensure that we don't get off the rails. Like what we see
Let's hold on to
happening.
that thought. Don't get off the rails. We'll be back shortly. Thank you.
Faith, family, business, adventure. This is the Phoenix Podcast with Ken Sharpe. Faith, family, business, adventure. This is the Phoenix Podcast with Ken Sharpe.
We're back, Napoleon. Wow, moral decay we talk about, the degradation of society. I reflect on a past, the leader of our church, who said that the greatest fabric of society is the family unit.
Yeah.
The sanctity and the preservation of the family unit.
Mm-hmm.
So looking in Zimbabwean context, I think we're better off than a lot of other societies and cultures. Of course, the divorce rate is there. We hear of men and small houses and things happening all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you see us as a new generation? If I look at the age of Zimbabwe today,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're aware, but 62% of the population is under 25 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
So mostly these are people that are not even married yet. And marriage, we know, is being put off later and later with the young generation.
True.
So how do you see them in 20, 30 years' time and the society of Zimbabwe and what you're doing and how to influence that outcome?
I think there's hope in the youth. A lot of people love to use the phrase "AMA 2000" and make it sound like it's the lost generation. I think there's hope in the youth. I think we have to do everything we can, because we can only do what we can, to preserve as much as we can of the moral fabric that we talk about, and trust them to take it over and trust them to run with it. There's an awakening that has started to happen, and I'll speak specifically of Africa and of Zimbabwe as well. There's an awakening that has started to happen where people starting to realize that we need not idolize the West. They don't necessarily have it figured out. They don't necessarily have the best models. They don't necessarily have the answers to the challenges that we face, to the challenges that the world faces. The answers are in humanity and in human beings. And we are just as human as the next person.
And in being human. As my daughter says, it's not as important to be a human being as it is important to be being human.
Being human, yeah. So we need to trust them to have the solutions for Zimbabwe to get to the next level from where we are today is in those young people. And it's in those young people, born in 2005, born in 2010, born in 2015, born in 2024. It's those young people that are going to do what needs to be done. And we have to do whatever we can to equip them and then trust them to run with it.
There you've heard it, future generation, we trust you. So coming back to this calling that you have, the NACZ,
Yes.
the last 20 years odd, what got you into, you started in media, and then what really got you into this space, and what kind of future do you see for yourself over the next 10, 20 years?
Again, there's a lot of just God guiding. First of all, when I left university, I saw myself as a marketing executive, because I studied marketing in my bachelor's degree, and I thought that's what's going to be me. After school, I thought, okay, let me volunteer at church for a few years. Volunteered at church, fell in love with media, started doing camera work, video editing, directing, producing. Then, after a while of doing that, one of the times we had this news bulletin at church that we did, like the church announcements, would do them as a pre-recorded news bulletin. One of the presenters didn't show up, and we had to do it. So I jumped in front of the camera, and I did it. And it was great. And I thought, oh, okay, so I can do this. So I went into TV presenting, did that for a while, did ZBC shows, did some shows, and then started emceeing weddings. That also started by mistake, because I was in the choir. One of the choir sisters was getting married. She didn't have a good budget. The choir was pledging, money to help her with her wedding. I didn't have any money, so I pledged, I'll MC for you. And I almost said it as a joke. And she took it so seriously, and now I was stuck with that. I went and started looking for YouTube videos of how to MC and all of that. I did that wedding. I only MC'd the ceremony. So it happened that Tich Mataz, one of the greatest broadcasters in Zimbabwe, was her relative. He then was emceeing the reception part. I was emceeing the ceremony. So I emceed the ceremony. After the ceremony, I thought I did terribly. I get to the back of the church. I see Tich Mataz sitting there. He's like, yeah, young man, that was great. I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, but I'm starstruck. I'm like, what, Teach Mataz? He's like, yeah, here's my card. You should call me. You know, I never called him. A year later, I meet him at another event where now I'm doing camera work and he's the MC. And he says to me, Faneo, you didn't call me. I'm like, wait, you remember? You remember me? So this time I was like, okay, give me your number again, because I never even saved it. I thought you were, I mean, what would I be calling Teach Mataz for? I was, so he then gave me, I called him, and then he says, yeah, you know, we're starting a new radio station. You know, I think, you know, you've got the vibe for it. You should come and try out. And then I kept following up for like 6 months. And then, you know, people then told me, no, Teach Mataz is a good talker, that one. Yeah, I probably lied to you. And then I stopped. And then later on, he calls, he says, young man, I told you to call me. We already did the auditions for the new radio station. I was like, what? So I thought I missed it. And then he says, okay, you can just come and you know, attend the training and just gain the knowledge. I was like, okay, great. So I went and attended the training. After the training, they said, we're doing the final audition. I then went and asked, can I also audition on this final one? And they said, no, okay. They had to do a whole meeting to say nobody wasn't there. But then, it's so, I mean, because I had nothing to lose, I went to this training and I was participating. I was raising my hand for everything. I was contributing.
Making up for lost time.
Yeah, so everyone is like, no, but we like that guy, you know, so let him audition. I auditioned, and that's how I joined Star FM.
So you got in?
I got in. That's how I joined Star FM in 2012.
Amazing.
And then, so that's how I got into the media. I worked at Star FM, then became programming manager. Then I left Star FM to start Capital FM as the founding station manager. Then I worked at Capital FM for 2 years, and then we had a big challenge. It was during the 2018 elections, and that was a very politically charged time. One of my presenters had an interview that was disastrous. You know, a lot of journalism principles were not followed in that particular interview. It caused quite a storm, and I was called in and told, listen, this is what has happened. And I had to fall on my sword. So that's how I left Capital FM. I left very unceremoniously because I was the leader of the ship and something went wrong. You can't say it's because of that present. You're the boss. So I left that way. But I mean, thanks to Zim Papers, they really, you know, were very supportive even after I'd left, which was great because it also sort of proved to the people that I was working with that, you know,
right. It wasn't really you.
It wasn't a dismissal, so to say. So I worked, I then started Center for Broadcasting Excellence, which was an organization that was training radio presenters. Trained radio presenters. Zim Papers, you know, allowed me to...
now we know why radio presenters are better than the journalists in the newspapers.
Oh, wow.
I didn't say that.
I will not comment on that one. So yeah, I did quite a few trainings. I've got quite a lot of my graduates that are in radio stations around Zimbabwe. And during COVID, that sort of died down. And that's when I was headhunted to be an event manager for NAMA. I was headhunted by JCMC, Jacaranda Culture and Media Corporation. Again, I had no experience in event management, but they found some articles that I'd written way back when I'd gone to South Africa, attended some awards shows, and then I wrote an article in the Herald saying, Zimbabwean awards, you know, you have no excuse. This isn't about money. It's about planning. It's about this. I wrote this whole article, and all of a sudden, I was now called in to do that same job, and I was going to be in the frying pan.
Gotta be careful what you say sometimes.
Exactly, you know. But that worked out quite well. But that's when I had my first interaction with the National Arts Council of Zimbabwe. Okay. Because NAMA, as an awards show, is owned by the National Arts Council of Zimbabwe. Right. They then contract an event management company to run it. So the event management company are the ones that engaged me. But then I had to interface with the Arts Council on the event, and during those interfaces, that's when I started to learn the structures of arts administration in the country and where things are and where things need to go. So that's been my experience with event management and with arts administration. And then recently, in January of 2024, I saw an advert which was saying, there is now a vacancy for the director of the National Arts Council, because the director was there, had been promoted to permanent secretary in the Ministry of Sports, Recreation, Arts and Culture. And a number of people said to me, you should apply. I thought, am I really cut out to be working in government? And then, we spoke about it with my wife, prayed about it, and thought, no, let's give it a shot. So I applied, went through rigorous interviews. I think I went through 6 interviews.
6 interviews?
6 interviews.
That's unprecedented.
It was crazy. But it was nerve-wracking as well, because, you start out saying, I'm just going to apply, and then once you go through the first level, and then you realize, hey, wait a minute, I've got a shot. And so it became so nerve-wracking, because, all those interviews, you keep being called, and you think, I thought that was the call to tell me that I got the job. Now, come for another interview. And then eventually I got a call from the board, the chair of the board of directors, and she told me, yeah, you got the job. So since May 2024, I've been in this position as the director of the National Arts Council. Daunting task, but it's been working out.
So what is your biggest challenge, that position?
So many challenges. Which one is the biggest? I think it's operating in a space where you see the potential, but it is difficult to reach out and grasp it because of the many limitations. Seeing the potential of the arts industry in Zimbabwe and knowing that we could be leading the narrative and the conversation in Africa. Seeing all the untold stories in the country and how they can be told through many different forms of art. Whether it's film, whether it's poetry, stand-up comedy, music, dance, visual art. Seeing all these stories that could change the world, stories that could impact the continent, stories that could change lives in the West, in the East, and not being able to grasp that turning, or that one thing that will get everyone to be able to achieve that level of storytelling. We are where we are, and where we need to go looks like it's 50 to 80 years away.
Right.
And being in this place now and wanting to make that change and that impact, yet the goal looks like it's that far away. That's the most difficult part. Knowing what we could do and what we could be, and not being able to touch it.
So here's a proposition and a question. If I look at leapfrogging, we can get there without the 80 years. We could probably get there in the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
One of my mentors is our chairman of Westprop, Dr. Michael Louis, and he often talks about the importance and power of relational capital.
Yeah.
He's really a relational person. He believes in the value of relationships. And I underestimated that in my own life, most of my life. But I've learned from him in the recent past that this is really an important ingredient. And when you look at collaboration, and the power of relationships in your sector, I think it's so critical to find the right partner or partners, Bollywood, Hollywood, wherever they are.
Yeah.
But if we had that collaboration mindset where we need to develop our own home-based formula of our story, of our narrative, but then we need the power of the network to magnify it, because that's what makes it, that's what really gets it to be at the level it should be.
So I wish I could write notes.
So with that thought, where would you see yourself wanting to be in the next, and I'm a man of the future, my immediate goal is 2050, but I won't take you that far. In the next 10 years, when you turn 50, what would you like to have said that you've achieved?
Wow. We need the power of the network to amplify. Sorry, that just stuck.
That's a good one.
Where would I like to be in the next 10 years? When I turn 50? I would like to have impacted the arts sector to an extent where we have internationally acclaimed artists that not only become rich from their art, but become templates. I would like for Zimbabwe to produce templates of artists who can, and I love the name of this podcast, who can be known as the Phoenixes, who rose from a country that many people loved to mock, many people thought was the dump of Africa, many people thought was like, you know, I remember having a conversation with a Ugandan lady the one time, and she said, "Why do you Zimbabweans sound so savvy? I thought there was no Wi-Fi in Zimbabwe." And I'm sitting there thinking, really? The message is that we're that backward? You know, I would love for our artists to be the spearhead that opens up trade, that opens up a business, that opens up development in Zimbabwe. Because I strongly believe that art has got soft power that can convince people to do business with you without them even looking at your books. But because they have been drawn to your aura, they've been drawn to your style, to your lifestyle, to the way you look, the way you express yourself. And I believe a lot of Zimbabweans are tourists today in countries where they learnt about on TV, through Hollywood, through music videos, through cartoons, through whatever media and art that has been sold to them. And they're giving business to those places. I look at people watching, you know, European Premier League. You know, people love football and they're so passionate about it. And I want to buy the latest jersey and I want this and that. I'm like, do you realize it's the media and art that has pushed this to you? And you are giving business to this country and to these organizations. People go to the White House in the United States. That White House is a bustling tourist destination. People simply want to go and look at that white building. There's nothing to it. But because I saw it in a movie and I want to go and sit on that bench where Olivia Pope used to sit. I want to go and look at that Washington Monument where that movie, you know, the White House Down, where this happened and this, and where the choppers used to on that pool. And then you stand there and you're like, wow, this is so fascinating. It's all from movies. It's all art. It's all from music videos. I would like our artists to get to that place where Zimbabwe rises from the ashes because of art.
Amen, amen. So we've come to the end of this program, Napoleon. It's fascinating. And I look into the future and I really see the busloads of people queuing to see the great Zimbabwe.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
But I have to say this to my brothers and sisters in Kampala, in Uganda, because you mentioned the lady from Uganda.
Yes.
And I must say, I was staying at the Serena Golf Course last week, just before we broke ground on our very own golf course product that we're developing at West Prop.
Yes.
And I was proud to say that they promote it as a 5-star. It's a beautiful setting. It's on Lake Victoria. It's the first time in Africa we're getting the European tour to come to an African country next year. And I looked at this all and I said, you know, it's not really a 5-star. This is probably a 4 at best. But our hotel is going to be a 5-star plus.
Ooh.
What we're doing in Harare, Zimbabwe is going to outshine those guys.
Absolutely.
And I look at their roads. They've got a nice highway, but every other road in the city is worse off than Harare. We are better off than Uganda right now in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
We need to stand tall and stand proud. And I believe what you said, that it's the soft power that will change Zimbabwe. Thank you for tuning into this show. Please like it, forward it, and stay tuned for more. Thank you, Napoleon. That was great.
Thanks, Ken.
Faith, family, business, adventure. This is the Phoenix Podcast with Ken Sharpe.